Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cara Dina Sale, and I'm here with the Community Technical Assistance Center of New York State. I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, Harm Reduction 101, which will focus on defining harm reduction and sharing its importance, as well as some strategies around using harm reduction in your practice. There are going to be 2 poll questions early in the webinar, so this will be a pop-up box with 2 choices, and choose one and then click Submit. And there will also be a Q&A at the end. Before we get started, I just want to take a moment to orient everyone to your WebEx system so you know how to participate in today's event. You may have participated in the past, but as you may be able to see, WebEx did a little upgrade. I want to know that everyone is placed on mute so there's not any background noises that may interfere or distract from others listening to the presentation. If you come across any technical issues during today's event, you can chat to the host, Brianna, who will be able to assist you. Thank you, Brianna. You have the opportunity to also submit questions at any point during the presentation, and then we'll get to them at the end. You can do that with the chat box feature, and that's found at the bottom of your screen. It lights up as orange when there are chats there, so you can click that and feel free to chat anything in the box. In fact, I think Brianna was chatting some information to you already. In order to ensure that we are able to answer as many questions as time permits, as I mentioned, please send them ahead of time. And once again, thank you so much for joining us. We're so excited and so appreciative to have Jenna Teen, the Bridge, and Naomi Weinstein from the Institute for Community Living, and that Naomi is also a CTAC partner of ours. Both of our presenters have many years of experience in the field of substance abuse and have worked with harm reduction approaches for years as well. We're honored to have them share their expertise with us today, and I will pass it on to them to introduce themselves and begin the presentation.
Hi, my name is Naomi Weinstein, and as Cara just said, I'm the Vice President of Innovations here at ICL.
I'm Jenna Tyne. I'm the Senior Vice President of Outpatient Services at the Bridge.
So we are going, let's see. Sorry, we're going to have a little bit of a problem here. All right. So our agenda today, just so you have a sense of where we're going, we're going to start with some poll questions, just getting a tour of the room, as it were. We'll talk a little bit about why harm reduction and what is harm reduction. We'll talk about required mindset and then give you some initial strategies. And we hope that you'll see this as one part of a 2-part series. So our next session, we will go much more into depth about specifics on the strategy. So this is just the overview day. So here's our first poll question. So you can right in the beginning. Finally, I would like all my clients who are drug users to strive for abstinence. Check off whether you agree or disagree with this statement. And notice there's no not sure. We should choose. All right, so we're going to give you a couple seconds. People will hopefully start responding. What we come up with. So,
Are trying to get a little bit of a sense of people's, the mindset that we talked about. So go ahead and pick your agree or disagree. And there's no right or wrong answer to this.
Absolutely not. This is really about what people think and recognizing that we all have a mindset when we come into situations and those things show up. All right, so what we see here is of the people who have voted, lots of you did not want to vote, but 32 people say disagree with that statement, and 80 people said they agree with that statement. So it looks like it's about a 2-to-1 ratio. So most people think that they would like clients who are drug users to strive for abstinence. Okay, and here's the second question. Promoting safer use of drugs encourages drug use. Again, do you agree or disagree?
And again, no right or wrong answer to this.
I'm going to give you silent, not waves. All right, so let's see what we're coming up with. Hear a lot of this, people, this goes to things like methadone become an issue for people around this. Do I really want people to be just substituting one drug for another drug? Wait. All right, we have 25 people say agree, and 125 people say they disagree. 55 people didn't have an answer. So we have about a 1-to-5 ratio on the agree and disagree. Let's just keep these two answers in mind as we go through the rest of our conversation. All right, we'll reflect back on these a couple of times. So these, what you see on the slide are some common scenarios. These are the kinds of things that all of us in the behavioral health world are encountering all the time. He's sober for a while, he seems to have started using again.
She denies she has a problem with alcohol.
Right, he's very aggressive whenever he's smoking K2.
I spoke with him about his marijuana use, but he doesn't want to stop.
And she's showing up high to group, right? These are common. So the traditional response to these is, as you can see, and I'll talk through this in a second, but let me just say a couple of words about my background, which is that I spent 15 years working in residential drug treatment, abstinence-based or abstinence-driven programs, and came out of it with a traditional harm reduction open approach. My thinking was absolutely, we see all the time people who would not be alive today if we hadn't put this abstinence-based approach. And what I've thought of a lot since then is about the people who didn't make it through the drug treatment program, the people where that abstinence-only approach was not the right thing. So if we say that 50% get better, well, about the other 50%, and where are they? So the traditional approach to those kinds of problems are, I could consider it's a problem and she needs to stop. I could strongly encourage this person to go to treatment, even, whether or not he says he doesn't want to stop, because I know that not everyone wants to stop using, but often after treatment has kind of taken root, people are saying, I'm so glad I did that. That's made all the difference in my life, even though I went kicking and screaming into this in the first place. And once they are willing to go into treatment, I'm going to applaud them. I am so happy that they said yes, that they are looking for that abstinence-based life. And if whatever I'm trying isn't working, I'm going to keep pushing them to get clean. That's what I want them to do. If not, I'm going to throw my hands up and okay, that's their choice. I can't do anything else. So that's how we usually operate. So now in harm reduction.
So now we're going to talk about what harm reduction is. So harm reduction is a set of strategies designed to reduce negative consequences associated with risky behaviors. Now, it was originally designed in response to substance abuse, but one of the things we want you to take away from this today is that harm reduction can really be used in a myriad of different ways. And the philosophy behind it is that it's based on a firm belief in and respect for people who engage in risky behavior, including substance use. What we're going to talk about is how the person is the expert in their lives, how letting them guide you through the process is really rooted in the harm reduction philosophy.
Jen, I've heard you talk about harm reduction in an interesting way, which I hadn't really thought about, which was we have this kind of alarmist perspective on harm reduction, and yet we apply harm reduction strategies to a whole host of other things in our lives.
Yes.
Do you want to say anything about it?
So some of the things that we do every day that are harm reduction are seatbelts, right? So the only way to prevent any risk from an automobile accident is not to drive, but that's not practical. And so we have seatbelts and speed limits. Riding a bike, we wear helmets, right? So riding a bike, especially in New York City, can be a very dangerous endeavor. And the way we reduce the harms related to it is through practical safety measures. And so that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today. Even in terms of safer sex, so, that has come from a point where at the beginning of the HIV/AIDS epidemic, we would give people condoms, and people thought it was sort of radical to give people who were positive condoms because it didn't fully, the only way to not transmit the disease at that point was abstinence, which again was not a realistic model because people are going to have sex.
Absolutely.
So harm reduction embraces all possible responses to risk behavior, and it includes abstinence. So it's a total spectrum from abstinence to continued safer use. So I think that's something that gets lost in the harm reduction conversation quite frequently. As a harm reductionist, if someone tells me that they'd like to abstain from all drugs and that's their goal, I'm going to immediately help them. As a harm reductionist, I'm never going to say, oh, no, don't abstinent, we should get you to a syringe exchange program. I'm going to let the person tell me where they are and what is the point of treatment for them at that point. So it is a spectrum. It allows me to be and meet people exactly where they are.
I've talked to a lot of people about harm reduction approaches, and everyone is surprised when they hear that abstinence is one of the options. And I think part of what's interesting to me is that in more traditional ways of thinking, you had either use or no use. Mm-hmm. And in harm reduction, we say, I'm concerned about the harm. What are all the different ways I can reduce the harm? And some of those options are abstinence. And it may even be abstinence for reasons that people feel forced into.
Correct. If
I think my children are going to be taken away, I continue to use, I may feel forced into abstinence, but I've made that choice. And therefore, if the harm reduction person is going to be supporting them, it's wherever they are. And that may be, my children at this point are more important to me, and therefore, I do whatever I can to stop using drugs.
Yes.
Self may say, I'm not giving that up. I want to keep using, but I'm really concerned about getting arrested. Now I'm going to work about what are the strategies we can employ to avoid arrest.
Correct.
Or to reduce use or whatever else can deal with that harm issue.
Yep. And I think we'll talk about that a lot in the 102 as well, about how to use motivational interviewing, because that's really what you're talking about, mm-hmm. right? Figuring out what their actual goal is. And generally when they find out what their goal is, reducing the substance use and reducing the harms related to the substance use naturally fall into the goal acquisition.
And clear what their goal is, the emphasis shouldn't be on the word goal, the emphasis should be on the word there. Mm-hmm. Right? Because too often the goals that we set for people are our goals for them, not their goals. Exactly. All right.
So, do you want to do this one?
So I think Jenna mentioned this before, but I think sometimes we think about harm reduction really as literal about substance use. I want to be clear that we can use harm reduction principles of reducing harm for any kind of risky behavior, and certainly unprotected or any kind of risky sex. But to use, gambling, screen time, or anything else you come up with.
Yeah, I would add things like sex work. I think we do a lot of harm reduction, or especially with our substance using clients, because frequently that's their modality of getting money for their drug use. And so we do a lot of harm reduction around sex work, right, because there's lots of risks.
Absolutely.
So any risky behavior that you can think of, you can apply this modality to.
Right. Okay. So why harm reduction?
A little bit about substance use in general, and as a society, we value quick fixes. There are all sorts of substances that we use, right, to alter our state of consciousness. I woke up this morning and had a latte, which I like to refer to as my morning speed because of the caffeine, which is an upper, and the warm milk, which will put you to sleep. And so it's an everyday part of our lives. If you think about when you go to social events, there is 9 times out of 10 there's alcohol. Not so much anymore, but cigarette use used to be sort of prevalent and prominent.
Right. For a lot of people, the idea of going to a party, like just imagine going to a holiday gathering or whatever, and there's no alcohol whatsoever, not a drop. That'd be a little odd, right?
Yep.
We're perfectly comfortable with that, and it's what we do with friends. We often get together for a drink, have a beer, a glass of wine. It's part of our normal.
Yeah, and in those settings, it's quite accepted.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yep, where we get into the sort of issues is when it crosses the line, right? So when it goes from being normal, social, fun, casual, to really impacting someone's life, it makes a very quick turn into being something that is a moral judgment, that the person is weak, that they have the wrong priorities, and much of this is fed by how we are socialized.
Absolutely. think about drugs are bad, crack is whack, any of that kind of stuff.
Just say no.
Just say no, and all of that often fails to think about as a society, not as individual professionals, but substance abuse as being often of a response to traumatic events or to other kinds of challenges in life. To apply characterological assessments on people who are using, right, their fault, and therefore they are perhaps less worthy of attention, respect, or anything else.
Well, there's an element of choice that people believe that this is a choice that people are making, right? But we wouldn't do the same thing to our clients who have diabetes who choose to eat Wheaties or donuts.
Absolutely.
Right? We don't tell them that they need to go away treatment for 28 days and be taken away from the donuts and the Little Debbies, right? So there is this, I think we just need to recognize, and it's this elephant in the room, that there is this sort of moral and judgment on people who use.
Absolutely. And part of what happens is when we're judging all these things, we end up with a lot of stigma. Right? So we're kind of curious to hear from you all, what kinds of stigma people experience when they're substance users. This is a chat box function now. It's your response. That's right. No problem. All right. So, Jenna, we can talk about some of the kinds of stigma that you want to list a couple of things you say.
Particularly with substance use, right? And we're not just talking about our clients, but there's certainly employment stigma around employment. And, many jobs require a drug screen. There's around housing, right? We know we have, in a lot of ways, we have conditioned our clients to say immediately that they're not using, right? Because in the past, their housing has been at risk. If they're actively using, their access to services has been at risk. Employment, housing, relationship, basically every area of life functioning is impacted by the stigma around substance use and being a substance user.
Medical, so some of the things I'm seeing are medical care. People about pain issues and how do we assess pain. You're not in pain, you're just making it up, you're just trying to get more drugs. And even if you think on an interpersonal level, so if I'm the client and I'm using substances and I go and talk to Jenna, who's the professional, one of her first questions to me when and she finds out that I use substances, if I get to the point talking to her about that, is, well, have you tried treatment, right? She immediately goes to, that's bad, this is good. And I understand that, so I'm going to be more reluctant to start with things, right?
And so I think our clients recognize the images that are conjured up when someone discloses their substance use. And quite frankly, I've had clients who will tell me that they're okay telling me they use cocaine, but they would never say they use crack, right? Even though it is the same substance. So they have an inherent sort of knowledge around the differences, and they feel stigma every day.
Absolutely. So when people feel stigma, what's their behavior like, or what are their feelings like? We're having, just so you know, we're having some difficulty seeing the chat box things. We're able to see the first two words, but not the full sentence. So we're going to answer this. We'd love to see things, but we probably won't be able to see them in vivo. So some of the behaviors you see when people feel this kind of stigma, experience this kind of stigma, is they feel angry and disrespected. They have no interest in engaging with us, or it's a really long time to trust us. You have to do a very hard work to earn their trust. And often they continue risky behavior. What Jason said, shame.
Shame, yes.
Absolutely.
Yep. Or don't they don't even interact with us in the service world, right? Because they have these expectations of how they're going to be treated. And so, it's sort of up to us to change the dynamic.
Absolutely. I mean, as we're talking, I'm thinking about, from my residential treatment days, the portion of people in treatment who are there only because they were court mandated or what we used to call mom-dated, right? Mom or dad said, you got to go to treatment because you can't come home. That was their primary reason for being there, not because it was their own volition, per se. So I think it's that whole how we respond to stigma is real.
Absolutely. And I think that there are other layers on top of this, right? So there's the stigma of being a substance user, but it's important to also think about what that's like for our clients of color, that they have, you know, barriers upon barriers and poverty and inequality, right? Because we really do look at drug use very differently. So our clients who come in who are smoking crack, we have a very different view of them than if I were to walk outside the building right now to Wall Street and engage with the bankers who, you know, are weekend warriors, and on the weekend they use cocaine, and there's not the same social stigma around that. Entire movies made about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you, Wolf of Wall Street.
Yeah.
But we're down Lower Manhattan, so that's the reason for the Wall Street comments. So action is give us an alternate way of interacting, and importantly, an alternate potential set of outcomes. All right.
So the harm reduction mindset, right? So this is really sort of the crux of being able to provide harm reduction services to the people that you're working with. So the first foremost is that your clients, the individuals you work with, and people in general, they are the experts in their own lives. They know themselves best. And I think sometimes when we talk about drug users, because we've sort of conditioned them to be distrustful of us, we don't feel an openness and a trust. So it's to sort of assess where they are, right? And so we chalk up to we know better than they do, because if they did know better, they wouldn't be making the choices that they're making.
Right. I think when we say that kind of idea, people know themselves best. Most people, yeah, of course. But when push comes to shove, go back to, yeah, but they made these stupid choices, so let me help them know themselves best.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll look at their real inner being without recognizing that they know where they are right now.
Yep. Second thing is safety is more important than abstinence. So reducing risk in the moment to keep someone alive, to keep someone out of jail, to keep someone housed, it trumps abstinence. If someone is not at the point where they want to be abstinent from substances, to sort of write them off and say, well, they're just not, quote unquote, compliant with treatment. You know, safety is significantly more important than that. And harm reduction really, right, the whole thing, it's all about reducing the harm, reducing the risks. And so harm reduction puts that at the forefront. The other thing is drugs serve a purpose for most people and may make some people's lives better or easier. It also, you know, the flip side of that coin is that frequently it may make their lives better and in some ways makes their lives more challenging. But it's important for us to recognize the ways in which substance use can make people's lives better and easier, right? Particularly when you're talking about coping skills and trauma. And some ways of using drugs are safer than other ways. You can help someone utilize their substances in a different way that reduces the harm, but that really takes a different sort of mindset. If you're an abstinence-only mindset, it's hard to think about the ways to reduce the harms.
Right, and so back to that initial poll question, the poll question number 2, that noting safer ways of using drugs encourages drug use. We have 1 to 5 ratio in terms of agree and disagree, and that means that there's a certain proportion of us, right, 15% or so, 15, 18%, who thinks, yeah, it really is. And it's fine to think that. But if you think that, now how is that being communicated to the people you're working with?
Right. Yeah. Because people are more likely to connect when they feel liked and respected, right? And that their point of view is taken into the conversation.
I always think about this one in terms of how call, I assume, are really wonderful human beings, but all of us have had an opportunity to meet people who don't like us. They fundamentally don't like us, and we don't know why, because we're wonderful people, but this case. And when we meet people who don't like us, we don't connect with them. We don't want to be their friend. We're not going to go out of our way to help them out. No, we're like, I don't want, no, that's not part of me. I don't need that. substances are the same, and if they don't feel fundamentally liked and respected, how?
Mm-hmm. And again, I think this is sort of what we've been trying to drill down, is that it's essential to be open to a full range of outcomes, including abstinence.
Right. So those are important things, and again, I think a lot of this is very easy to embrace when you're reading it. Doing reality brings up a lot of but, and they kind of excuses for going the other way.
This is challenging. I have been doing this work for a long time, and there are still certain times where I'm challenged by a really sort of innovative idea that reduces the risk, but really puts the person in the driver's seat. I think as a clinician, right, and someone who went into the helping profession for a reason, even though I'm doing this work for a very long time, there's still some situations where I'm like, but.
Yeah, it's really hard to hold back. So this kind of goes back to what we were just saying, that we need to be aware of our own biases and judgments and how they are communicated to people. They're communicated through the words that we choose. They're communicated through our body language and our tone of voice. It's even communicated in terms of how we ask questions, for example, on assessments, right? We have questions that we need to ask, but there are ways of asking those questions in worse ways.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I also would point out here that, and we talked about this a little bit when we were preparing for this, that it's about 1 in 10 Americans that have had a substance use disorder, right? So a diagnosable substance use disorder. That means that most of us know somebody in our lives who struggled with substance use. And I think that being a professional and what happens in your personal lives are very different sort of things, but we sometimes bring those experiences with people in our lives into our work. And so you can't avoid that, right? That's why we talk a lot about transference and countertransference, but you have to recognize that it's there. And you have to recognize that the client in front of you is not the same as your uncle who had an alcohol problem, or, right? Everybody's different, and everyone needs a different set of strategies.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about risk and safety. All right.
So we're talking a little bit about the continuum of use, right? So there's abstinence or no use, and then what we call experimental use, all the way occasional and casual. So that's what we started with, right? When you go to the wedding or the holiday party, or, right, those are occasional and casual uses of substances, and not just alcohol. People can casually use marijuana. There are people who do casually use cocaine. And opiates. There are people who casually, and benzodiazepines. I mean, any drug can be used casually. I think we have this sort of alarmist view that if you try something once, you're going to get addicted. That is not how the addiction model works.
And most people, I think, and maybe this is just people I know, but I feel like most people are in kind of occasional casual use category.
Yes, for the most part. And then there's regular use and heavy, I usually say heavy or chaotic use, because I think that's sort of what we see is the stuff that comes into someone's lives when they hit the heavy use.
And we frequently talk about this continuum of use from a perspective where we're concerned about regular or heavy use. We start labeling that as addiction.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. And also, I think sometimes just us being aware that occasional or casual use will not necessarily devolve into regular or heavy use, right? Absolutely. And so sort of meeting someone where they're at when they're in the occasional or casual, and this comes up a lot with adolescents, right, is how do we give them appropriate information, and how do we support them in their experimental or occasional use so that it doesn't become regular or heavy use.
Right. And recognizing that this continuum of use is different for each drug that a person uses. Yeah. So you could, be an occasional drinker, an experimental opiate user, and a regular smoker of marijuana.
Correct.
All right?
Yeah.
So all three of those.
So instead of you'll see the next slide, instead of focusing on the continuum of where they are, harm reduction really forces you to focus on the risk of what they're doing, because you can be an occasional user with very high risk, or you can be a heavy user with very low risk, right? You use in your home, you know all of your safety strategies, you're not at risk of losing your housing. Those clients do exist, those people do exist.
Absolutely. absolutely. So, sorry, we're having problems here. All right.
So then some types of risk, right? So obviously health, I think, we're all sort of working in a setting where we are fully aware that we're in the middle of an opioid epidemic. And so in those situations, it's not just health, it's life or death. People's family and relationships are at risk when they are chaotically using or heavy users. There are legal risks, economic risks, housing risks, and one that we don't talk about a lot, which is sort of a spiritual or sense of self risk. I've worked with a lot of clients who lose who they are because of their years of continued use. And really a big part of helping them change and reduce their use, if that's their goal, is helping them regain that sense of self, and we call it self-efficacy. And in 102, we'll talk a little bit about the importance of self-efficacy and how incremental change is very, very important.
All right. So with the harm reduction approaches, as I think we've been kind of hammering home, we're talking about some safety strategies.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So do you want to take?
Sure. So, when we have a traditional approach of convincing someone that their drinking is a problem and that they need to stop right now, that's a very common approach. But a harm reduction approach would explore the ways alcohol helps her, the risk she faces, and skills that might be helpful, and what she can do to reduce the risk, right? So one of the things that happens, when she's drinking is she lives in supported housing and she starts to cook and falls asleep and is frequently has visits from NYPD. You're going to talk about the results of the use initially and reducing those risks and those safety issues, and it demonstrates and it communicates to the individual that you are non-judgmental and that you genuinely care about their situation. And the situation at hand is this issue with potentially having a fire in the apartment, right?
I think about the times when I have looked at progress notes, for example, and treatment plans, and I see, you have the person's own words, and you have what the program's asking, and sometimes the program, the parameters of the program may require certain kinds of goals, but often there's a goal of, reduce dependence on substances, mm-hmm. and what the person to be hinting at is something completely different. And so you marry your concern about their drinking and your thoughts about reduce down to abstinence, and that person's concern about the fires, mm-hmm. and the police contact. Mm-hmm. The second one?
The second one, so the traditional approach would be to strongly encourage someone to go to treatment, although they say they don't want to stop. A harm reduction approach would be to talk to them about risks that concern him, such as possible arrest or overdose, and what he can do to stay safe. So this is a little bit in an engagement phase where the person doesn't want to go to treatment. If you do it enough, eventually they will say they want to go to treatment. And what do we know about those people who go to treatment, right? So you spend all this time and effort getting them into a detox, and 2 days later they have found out a detox because they didn't really have the internal motivation in the beginning. So talking to them about, what this does, what the risks are, opens up a whole different type of conversation. And
I just want to be clear that we're not saying that abstinence should never be a goal. It's about what our goal is. It's what the person's goal mm-hmm. is. Meet them where they're at, truly, and from there, yes. and prioritizing, again, safety over abstinence. Mm-hmm.
With the goal of, I think that the interesting thing about this is that the clients that we work with all have goals that are separate from stopping use. Mm-hmm. And some of our work is to help them develop the discrepancy between what their actual goal is, right? So, for example, someone who wants to go to work, if they are using crack cocaine on a regular basis and they tend to do so at night and staying up all night, the reality of being able to go to work is slim.
No problem.
Because they can't get up, they can't even make it to my appointments. So instead of saying, okay, I think the crack use is a problem, I think you should go to treatment, I'm going to say, what are some ways that you can continue to use but still make it to my appointments on time, right? So can you agree that you're going to stop using at 8 p.m. And you're going to try to get some sleep and then come into my appointment, right? I mean, it sounds wild, but people are genuinely able to do things like that, and that's what I'm talking about, building self-efficacy, where if they're able to do that, they're then able to do the next step and the next step and the next step, so that you are building on this idea that people will reduce their use as they start to see other things in their lives come to fruition.
Absolutely.
Applaud her when she says she's willing to go to a treatment program. So we definitely want to be a champion of abstinence-based programs if that's what the person wants. If she changes her mind, we're going to support her in that decision and talk about other ways to reduce harm. People go back and forth all the time about treatment, and you know, we're in a situation where someone might come to you on Monday and say they want treatment, and you can't find them a bed on Monday. So when they come back on Wednesday, they've decided that they don't want treatment anymore. You know, generally, we'll sort of do a very small assessment about what changed, but I'm not going to harp on the treatment piece because, you know, they're not at that stage anymore. Follow them through the stages of change. So they went from potentially action, planning and action back to pre-contemplation, contemplation. And if these don't work, just keep trying to get him clean, which we don't use the word clean because the opposite of clean is dirty. And so we're very careful about our language, or just let him do what he does. So really, a harm reduction approach would focus on connection, trust, and respect, and what can be done to promote safety and well-being in the current moment, wherever that person is.
So this is a little bit of a preview for what's to come in the second set of the series, but just imagine the difference between the following. The first one is you're talking to somebody and they admit to opiate use, to drug use, and you start talking immediately about detox, about treatment, about your concerns about them dying, and that's such. The option is you say, okay, great. So we're using, do you typically use with a friend, or are you alone? Because I don't want you overdosing if no one's there. I want to make sure you're safe. Or if you said to somebody, you know, are you buying clean water? Because it's really important to keep things clean. I'm hoping you're not sharing needles because that's just so dangerous. Now the script flips a little bit, and so where the person expected judgment, they're finding concern for safety. And now it becomes a more openness potentially for working with someone because their concern is really about you as a person, not your behavior.
And it completely shifts the dynamic.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, harm and opportunities.
So you'll see over to the left it says safety strategies. Safety strategies and risk reduction, harm reduction are an active part of every step of working with an individual. So in engagement, right, in a traditional harm reduction approach, engagement is where we provide concrete tools for someone to keep themselves safe, right? So this is why syringe exchange programs work, because they offer a service that is very low threshold, which is providing a clean syringe, and is a tremendous engagement tool. So most of us don't work at syringe exchange programs, so what kind of engagement tools can we have? What kind of engagement tools, what kind of harm reduction can we use in engagement? And we've basically been talking about that. It's how you approach it. It's the scenario that Naomi just went over, where you're really sort of assessing for risk and providing concrete strategies in the moment. So if you're working with someone and they say that they're having unprotected sex, immediately you're going to say, okay, well, do you have access to condoms? How can I provide you with condoms? That's a concrete engagement where you're not judgmental. You're saying, oh, well, you shouldn't be having sex with multiple partners unprotected. You're basically saying, I recognize what you're doing, and in the engagement phase, I'm just going to help you be safe around it.
Right. A very different kind of message.
Mm-hmm. And it withholds judgment, right? I'm not judging the good or bad of someone having multiple partners. I'm just saying I know what the risks are to that, and here it is.
So can you talk a little bit about this assessment process, especially how do you ask questions without being judgy?
Yeah. So one thing I tell my staff frequently is when you're assessing for this, you're just going to assume that, like everyone, our clients use substances, they have sex, they do all the things that humans do, and if you come at it from that perspective, and some of it is your mindset, right, that this is something that you can have a real conversation about, you're going to, so when I ask people, I don't say, have you ever used drugs? I say, what drugs have you used? Right, I'm normalizing the fact that humans use drugs, right, and I'm doing it in a way where I'm kind, and respectful and engaging and asking from a point of genuine curiosity, because I want someone to tell me was 50 years ago or they used 5 hours ago, right? And so it's how you word questions, and I think we'll get into this a little bit more in the second session.
Yeah.
But again, it's your questions and the way you're assessing can convey a concern for the person's safety, right? So my follow-up questions are always around the risks, about the actual use, not about if they want treatment, but about their risk behaviors, right? So when people tell me they use, I ask them where they use. I ask them who they use with, right? Because those are two really big things. If they're using alone, I'm going to have a conversation about not using alone, particularly if it's opiates. If they're using in the street, we're going to talk about where in the street do you use, right? Because I don't add incarceration on top of all the other issues that they're struggling with.
Okay. All right. Next up is person-centered treatment planning.
So person-centered treatment planning, this is a huge part of it. This is really, again, putting pen to paper to document the person's goal, right? My goal for them, I might see how much the alcohol plays out in their lives, and I might want them to get treatment because I know it will reduce all of the issues they're having, but my goal doesn't matter. It's their goal that matters, right? And so when I'm doing person-centered treatment planning and someone tells me they want to work, but I know that they drink consistently throughout the day, we're going to start talking about the work, and through that, I'm going to have conversations about the use.
And it's hard not to swallow, right?
It totally is.
It doesn't matter what you want. It's what they want.
Yeah. Right. I think that, and again, it's easy for me to sit here on this webinar and say that. It's a very challenging thing to do. But it's a lot for the relationship you have with the person, right? When you're doing it person-centered and you're putting their words in the treatment plan.
And the follow-up one, of course, is service delivery that is person-centered.
Correct, right? So if someone tells me that they want to go to work, when I go out there to provide services, the first thing I'm going to do is talk about work, and we are in that process. And through having that conversation, I'm going to find out that the alcohol has been a barrier. And talk about it as a barrier. We're not going to talk about it as anything other than this is additional barrier. Just like I would talk about someone's mental health symptoms as barriers, I feel like having mental health symptoms is a moral failing, just like I'm not going to talk about have someone with a substance use issue being a moral failing, right? It's a barrier to them reaching their ultimate goal.
Yeah. Can you talk about motivational interviewing and the role that it plays?
Yeah, so basically everything I've been talking about is motivational interviewing, right? So you have to figure out what someone's ultimate goal is and work with them on that. And through motivational interviewing, right, we roll with their resistance around change of the behavior, whether it's substance use or any other behavior, to be quite honest. We help them develop discrepancies, right? So I've had clients who want to work and who will tell me that alcohol, the fact that they wake up and have 2 beers in the morning is not a barrier to work. I start there. And as we go, right, and I'm going to start trying to find them jobs. I'm going to start saying you can apply here, you can apply there, and when they are able to go through with it. And so then I have to reevaluate, is alcohol as big a problem as I thought it was? Maybe it's not, right? A lot of this is constant reassessment of where someone is. But 9 times out of 10, if they're problematically using and you've assessed that, it's going to come out in the conversation, and in building self-efficacy around them reaching this goal, you're going to be able to do the work around the substance use.
Also saying something interesting, which is it requires a fair amount of self-awareness. That you're constantly saying, well, maybe I made the mistake, maybe I was imposing my own thoughts, maybe I was being judgy, maybe I was, and having to constantly have that conversation with yourself.
Yep. And that's why we started with the mindset. Yep. That's why we started with mindset, because it really is sort of changing the way you mentally look at the way you provide services.
Right. Yeah, my own process, I'm kind of a very abstinence, black and white piece to being more comfortable with this. It's a lot of time thinking about my reactions and where I'm making judgments about people based on my own value system for myself as opposed to my value system for somebody else. So I spend a lot of time on that.
Point.
You want to talk about that?
So harm reduction programs, we're just going to touch on very briefly because I do want to have time for the Q&A. Harm reduction programs are examples of harm reduction principles in action. So harm reduction programs, which when we say harm reduction programs, we tend to mean syringe exchange programs, but syringe exchange programs are by no means is that all they do. Many of them do health services, mental health services, peer services. They really are wide in their scope. I will say that one of the things that I really enjoy about harm reduction is that it gives me this giant toolbox of things that I can refer back to. And when we talk about the person and being person-centered, in a single day, I might meet with 5 or 6 people, and one person comes in, and for them, the AA model or the NA model, they know that's what works for them. So in that moment, in that session, I am a champion of the AA-NA model. Then I might meet somebody who wouldn't buy into the AA model because they can't do the spirituality thing, and so they want to do moderation management, right? In that moment, I believe in moderation, right? And then there's everything else in between. There's people who come and they really have bought into the moral model. You know, I'll meet them where they're at and try to pull them out of that because that doesn't build self-efficacy or change. And so I think it's a really great way and another thing that people can have in their toolbox to work with individuals.
Absolutely. So I guess the question now, Kara, I think this is probably a part for you also to kind of feed us some of the questions, but we'd like to hear some of your thoughts also about how you might be applying harm reduction strategies in your work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yes, I can help with this. We also do have some questions that have come up as well that relate to this. And
do you want some of the questions?
It looks like Kara's line just got disconnected,
Okay.
so I think she'll be calling back in momentarily.
Okay. Goal setting, I can't see what Owen, we're only seeing the first 3 words of questions. Gotcha. Okay, so goal setting at the treatment plan level seems like it would be most consistent with this approach.
Yes, absolutely. Everything about the treatment planning from a person-centered perspective should be collaborative. And you're really going to rely on the individual to sort of help you set the goal with them, right? Because it's a partnership. Much about harm reduction is a partnership. Okay, so another question is, how do you respond to a client who justifies their use by stating that you are giving them permission to do so? So I'll tell you that I've had people say this to me, and I will point out to them that this is something that they're going to do regardless, and I'm aware that this has been happening, and so what I'm concerned about is they choose to use or not use, but I'm going to give them tools to reduce risk around everything in their life. So I try to generalize it to everything that they do. And I will flat out say, I'm not giving you permission. This isn't permission. This is me being concerned for your well-being, because if something happens to you, we're not going to be able to work together anymore.
Right. Another question here is there a harm reduction method for alcohol abusers?
For sure, right? So harm reduction with alcohol abusers, there's lots of things. So I tell my people who drink alcohol, number one, they should set what they're going to do at the beginning of the night, right? So I encourage people to set a goal that they're going to, only have 11 drinks or only going to have 8 drinks. And sometimes I actually like to say, how many drinks are you going to have? And they'll say, well, I'm going to have 20. And I'll say, well, why not 50? Because in reality, they could have as many as they want. And so sort of putting out there that they are in control of this even though they feel wildly out of control of it, is huge. But the practical things are make sure they eat before they drink, make sure that they're staying hydrated, right? So I would have clients do agreements with me that for every alcoholic drink they would have half a glass of water. That if they are going to be using alcohol, I'll do an assessment of where they're going to use, who they're going to be using with, and sort of the situation they're going to be in, right? Because again, it's not just about the alcohol in and of itself, it's about the behaviors that arise. So I'll ask, when you drink, are there other drugs that you like to do? Or do you feel like your inhibitions for other drugs are lowered? And then we'll talk about that. If they're going to tell me that they're going to drink outside, we're going to have a very lengthy conversation about what that looks like and what the safety measures are for that, to avoid arrests or tickets or any of that. So then there are a number of strategies, and Google is your best friend. There is lots and lots and lots of information on harm reduction tools and resources. And so if you do alcohol harm reduction, you'll be able to find some additional strategies. I'm struggling a bit with harm reduction TGs in my group, as I can only think of a few methods of harm reduction, such as substituting with less harmful drugs or reducing the amount they use. Do you have other harm reduction topics, activities, or tips to use in my IDDT group? So it really depends on the substance and the behavior. Again, I will say, if you guys are not aware of the Harm Reduction Coalition's website, I believe it's just harmreduction.org. They have a whole bunch of resources around cocaine, crack, alcohol. They have a wide array of all sorts of tools. And really, I was in a group and I was doing an IDDT group. I would start with asking the people in the group to name the risks related to their use. We don't have to always do all the work. I will tell you that many of the clients utilize strategies to reduce their risk, right? That's how they've stayed out of jail. That's how they've sort of been able to remain in supported housing. So really, your clients, most of the harm reduction stuff I've actually learned from clients, not from other staff.
Another question here is, do you find that using harm reduction leads to abstinence? How does the disease concept and not being in control come into play?
So I do find that using harm reduction in some cases does lead to abstinence, right? I mean, I think one of the things that really sells the syringe exchange programs is that it reaches out to people who otherwise wouldn't reach out to service providers at all and lets them know what their options are. And so just in building that trusting relationship, people are willing to take risks, positive risks that they otherwise wouldn't be willing to take. I've worked with many, many people, adolescents especially, over the years who once had a strong relationship with me, and we got to the point where we were talking about potentially going into treatment. It was really the trust and the engagement in our relationship that allowed them to take that next step. And so I do think that it can lead to abstinence, but again, I don't think that I to that with that being my goal, unless that's the client's goal initially.
I also think that, reflecting back on my years in drug treatment, that a lot of people who were abstinent during drug treatment leave drug treatment, stay out of drug treatment, stay out of trouble, and continue to use at some level. They're still drinking, they're still smoking marijuana, but they're managing to live a life where it's controlled. And I think we have a perception that if you are a chaotic drug user, then all future use can only be at a chaotic level. And I don't think that that's necessarily the case. I've known too many people who are able to practice control in their drug use after having gone through a treatment process. So I think that's an option.
The other thing, so I think the idea of controlling your drug use, I think, is a very hard concept to sort of understand because it is so difficult for our clients. Not necessarily because of the use, but because of all the other things in their lives, right? Their past trauma, that they're using it as a coping skill. And so harm reduction strategies allow you to sort of have that level of engagement. You can start to help them build other coping skills and other strategies for dealing with all the other stressors in their lives, right? Because this isn't really about controlled use, it's about reducing risk. So someone could be very chaotic in their use, and be sharing syringes and injecting in a public bathroom, and I might only be able to change one of those behaviors. I might only be able to get them to, utilize a syringe exchange program, but they're homeless, so they're going to continue to shoot up in public spaces, right? I'm looking at them, and I'm going to applaud them and make a huge deal about the clean syringes, even though there's still this other aspect of them using in a public space, because, again, it's about people change when they feel like they have self-efficacy. And reduction really allows people to build their self-efficacy because we applaud small incremental changes.
Absolutely. So I'm noticing we have 2 minutes left, and we still have a whole bunch of questions, but I don't think we're going to get to them all. I'm hoping that you will tune in for part 2 of this, Harm Reduction 102.
Yes.
So it'll be on October 11th from 12 to 1 p.m. So I think it's 2 or 3 weeks from now. And we'll go through some more, just talk more in depth at all this stuff. And we'll also save these questions and see if we can get some answers to you all.
Some of these questions are amazing. How would you write about harm reduction in treatment plans? Would you still write in a treatment plan that they want to work, but not anything about doing drugs? I would ask them, right? I mean, it depends. It really is case by case, but I'll work with somebody and I'll say, okay, so your main goal is work. So here are the things we need to do, right? So we need to work on interview skills. We need to get you a resume. You need to be on time for things, right? And so as I start to work with the person, one of the reasons why they may not be on time for our meetings regularly is because of their use. So I'll say to them, can we put something about shifting your use in there? And, they say yes, then that's great. If they say no, then I leave it out of the treatment plan, but I don't leave it out of our conversations.
Right. Karen, I'm going to turn this over to you for the last tiny bit.
Thank you so much to both of you. This is fantastic. I've been chatting with a lot of the participants, and I know they're getting a lot out of your conversation and taking away from your knowledge quite a bit. So I just want to review our upcoming events. So please, Harm Reduction 102, as Naomi mentioned, you were sent an announcement yesterday through CTAC. We'll send a reminder. It's a sort of a short turnaround, but we did this so that we could kind of keep the topics close together. So October 11th from 12 to 1. If you can't get there, will be a recording, but we do hope you can join us. I did just copy a bunch of the questions that maybe that's how we start off with at the next one, but I'll leave that up to you, Jen and Naomi. And then I wanted to just say that in October, sometime in mid-October, we're going to release a short video by Dr. James Rodriguez around the neurobiology of resilience, which will be really exciting. So stay tuned to that. You'll just receive an announcement with the video, and if that is of interest to you, please feel free to view and share it. And then we may have 1 or 2 other offerings that we're still figuring out for the month of October, but stay tuned. There you will receive announcements or visit our website, www.ctacny.org. And I just want to say on behalf of all of us, thank you so much for your participation today. You all have been fantastic, and we will see you soon. Have a great day.
Bye.